So what is going on, guys? 90%93 here with another video, and today we're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about the iPad Air 4 versus the iPad Pro 11. And I actually have them both right here, and I think the better comparison is actually with the iPad Pro 11-inch from 2018 because A, it's the same body, as you guys can tell, and I think price-wise, storage-wise, they make more sense because you can pick one of these up refurbished for about $550 if they're available in the Apple Store. So I think that's the better comparison instead of comparing it to the 2020 iPad Pro, which is at that $800, 128 gig price point. But let's get it going, guys. So the first thing we have to talk about is the actual design of the iPad Air versus the iPad Pro. From a design and physical standpoint, they're the exact same thing, right? The back of it is the same, the size is exactly the same, it's the same thinness, it has the same exact camera module. The only real difference on the back of the iPads is that the iPad Pro does have a flash, even if you're comparing it to the 2018, and obviously with the 2020 model, you get LiDAR and wide angle. This one has zero flash, only the single camera, and then of course the colors of the iPad. That one pretty much just comes in space gray and silver. This one you have all those pastel colors, and I have this one in that bluish color, but as you guys can see, kind of just looks like space gray depending on the light and how the light is actually hitting the back of the device. And then if we turn around to the front of the iPad Air in comparison to the iPad Pro, yeah, the iPad Pro is exactly 11 inches, and then the iPad Air is at 10.9 mark. And I think the only reason they did that is maybe to give a reason to go to the iPad Pro, but at the same time, I don't think it's that big of a reason. The bezels are a little bit thicker, but if you've never owned an iPad Pro, this is going to be an immense upgrade to any other iPad that you've used in the past with the, the Touch ID home button and things like that. So in terms of the front, it's exactly the same except the bezels are a tiny bit thicker, and then you also get 500 nits of brightness versus 600 nits of brightness on the iPad Pro. Just keep that in mind. I haven't really seen any differences, any visual differences, especially even outside. I haven't noticed anything. And then also the last thing that you want to keep in mind is that this one has Face ID for biometric unlocking, and then Touch ID for the new iPad Air, which I'm going to touch on in a little bit. But long story short, I actually prefer Face ID on the iPad Pro because, I'm at home most of the time when I use the iPad Pro, so I don't have a mask on. So it doesn't really, so the Touch ID doesn't help me in any way. And then with the Magic Keyboard, all I do is press spacebar and it kind of unlocks it for me from a distance. Versus this, I have to reach over every time to Touch ID and unlock it. Yeah, people make the argument that in a world where we're wearing masks and Face ID doesn't work as well. I agree with that 100%, but put it on the iPhone. For my iPad Air and my iPad Pro, I use them at home mostly, so it's nice to be able to unlock with just my face. That's why I want the Face ID to come to max, so I can just Face ID open my MacBook Pro or my MacBook Air, whatever the case may be. But again, from aesthetic and visual differences, that's all you really see. Front is a little bit thicker in bezels. Back, you get different colors minus the actual flash, which again, I don't know how many people are taking pictures with their iPads. I definitely don't. The only thing I do is a little bit of scanning documents, and sometimes I have to use it for a thumbnail, but that's very rare. I think I've only used it for 2 or 3 thumbnails before. So now let's talk about the internals of the iPad Pro versus the iPad Air. The iPad Pro 2018 has that A12X Bionic chip, right? And it's been wonderful. I still even use the 2018 12.9-inch iPad Pro for everything, for my editing, for my professional work, for whatever the case may be. I use it for everything, and I've never had an issue with it at all. The only issues I've had with it, they usually go towards all the beta testing that I do, not really because of the chipset or the lack of power from the iPad. So the A12X Bionic has been wonderful, 0 hiccups, and I think it'll still be a great chipset moving forward. And I know that these iPad Pros from 2018 will at least get me probably to 2023, 2024 before I really start to notice a decrease. Maybe once we start editing like 16K, as a norm, then it'll start to slow down a little bit. And then obviously you have the A12Z on the 2020 iPad Pro, but a lot of people say they don't even tell the difference. It's just a little bit more GPU power, which again, I don't even need. But then you have the new A14 on the iPad Air. And so far it's been good. I haven't noticed anything different. I haven't noticed any hiccups. It hasn't felt slower or faster than the 2018 iPad Pro. So at the end of the day, the A14 is just that. Basically, I think for right now, you won't notice a difference. If you're coming from an older iPad, amazing. You're gonna see a night and day difference. But if you're coming from an iPad Pro, which I don't really know why you would, again, you also won't really notice a difference, in my opinion. So the A14, if anything, it just gives you a little more longevity long term. So it'll probably get you to like 2025 versus 2023 with the A12X and the A12Z. But again, these might even blow that out of the water because these chips are getting so good, so efficient, so fast that these things could last 10 years. I still have an iPhone 5S downstairs that works fine. It's just, yeah, the battery stinks, but the phone itself works fine, and it's still running, I think, iOS 12. So that's, a testament to Apple and their chipsets and what they can do internally. And then another thing that the iPad Air is lacking, which is kind of a physical and internal thing, is the ProMotion, right? ProMotion is basically how the iPad screen refreshes itself and how quickly it refreshes itself on a second-by-second basis. So the iPad Pro, even on the 2018 models, have that ProMotion 120 Hz display. It is adaptive, so you don't see it all the time. It's only there when it feels like it's needed to be used. Versus this one, you have a 60 FPS, just a regular screen. Coming from an older iPad, you won't notice a difference because it's the same refresh rate. But if you're coming down from an iPad Pro, and again, I don't know who would do that. Well, I don't see anybody coming from a 2018 or later iPad Pro and switching to the iPad Air. But if that is the case, then you might notice a little bit of a difference. But even then, after 2-3 days, I forgot about it and it felt fine. Like the iPad Air was totally fine. But again, if you're coming from a normal iPad, you're not going to notice a difference, and it's just going to feel nicer and better because the screen is brighter, the screen is bigger, there's no buttons, the bezels are smaller. It just looks like a more futuristic device, and I'm kind of liking this 11-inch form factor. I'm liking how small it is. And I'm also going to show you guys some B-roll of some slow-mo shots of me comparing the two screens with that ProMotion moniker. So at the end of the day, this is a price game, right? This isn't really a capabilities game. It's not really how much better the Pro can be versus the Air, because right now, especially if you compare it to the 2018 model, to me they're identical. Aside from the color and then the Touch ID versus Face ID, they're pretty much identical to me, and that's the beauty about what Apple's doing. They're trying to hit every single price point. You have the ability to get a computer at $300 now with that iPad Air 8th Gen, and even less if you go for a 7th Gen refurbished. And those are still powerful. Like I still have the 7th Gen and it still works fine. Yeah, it's running the 810 chip, but again, still works perfectly fine for whoever needs it. So Apple's just trying to knock down every single price point, so they literally have zero competition from the outside, and their only competition is what they make internally. I think that's what Apple's doing. They're taking this iPad Air 4 and it's gonna eventually cannibalize the iPad Pro 11-inch sales. And then I think Apple, like I've stated before, Apple's gonna make the 13-inch, like the main Ultra Max Pro model, and add a 15-inch tablet going forward, just to give it a little separation. So you'll have a 13 and a 15-inch tablet, you have the Air at that 11-inch, then you'll have the 10.2-inch, just regular iPad at that bottom, and then the Mini, of course. So I think that's what the lineup is gonna look like. Apple's just trying to tackle every single price point from $300 all the way to $2,000 for a tablet, depending on how you spec it up. And I like what they're doing, guys, but in my opinion, it's a toss-up. If you find an iPad Pro 2018 refurbished, hop on that. It'll save you $50 and you'll still get the same amount of storage. And if you can't, then the iPad Air 4 is another great choice at that $600 price point, even though it is 64 gigs, because then you have to go automatically jump to 256. There isn't any middle ground. That's the only real difference between the current 2020 iPad Pro and how it's sold, because that one starts at 128 gigs and that's 800. So the argument is really that the Air is only $75 cheaper than the Pro 2020 because of the fact that it's only 64 gigs versus 128. So it's just a numbers game, guys. But at the end of the day, if you want to save money and you want to get 98% of the way there, go with an iPad Air 4. There's no point in getting an iPad Pro 11-inch, guys. If you want a bigger one, then obviously you have to go with the iPad Pro 12.9. But that's pretty much your only options, guys. But hopefully that helps clarify a little bit more. I'm going to have a few more videos diving deep into a workflow with the iPad Air to see if it can really handle everything. But it's been handling all this video editing very smoothly. It exports it just as fast. Like I said, I've had no hiccups with any of them, guys. But that's gonna do it for this video. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. Like I said, I'm doing a Twitter giveaway that ends on Sunday night. Happy Election Day, and until next time, peace.